Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the June 6th meeting of the Citizen Oversight Board. We are joined today by a special guest from the Civil Service Commission. Sorry, I was looking at the acronym and forgot what it was. The Civil Service Commission, Executive Director Nisi Murray. And Nisi will hop on her camera quickly to introduce herself, but her connection's better without it. So go ahead and introduce yourself. And then we've sent some questions in advance. If you wanted to work through those and make any other opening statements, you're welcome to do that. And then we'll just engage in dialogue when we're ready.
Julia, do you want to you want to start with that or approve the minutes? What do you want to?
I don't think we can approve without a quorum.
Oh, you're right. My bad. I forgot about already the
quorum. It's all right.
That's correct.
I would like to approve them. We just can't.
Yep, absolutely. You're right. Yeah.
All right, Nisi, go ahead.
Well, good morning. Let me first say thank you for having me today. Really grateful to be able to come on and talk about the Civil Service Commission. I am Executive Director Nisi Murray. I have been the Executive Director for Civil Service Commission for about 1.5 years now. Prior to that, I did nearly 2 terms as a commissioner for the same agency. So I was a commissioner for civil service. Again, my tenure was cut short by a couple of months, I think 2 months, when I took on this role as executive director. And so I am unfortunately going to turn my camera off. Not sure why Zoom makes my system crash. Feel really, really bad about that, but I'd rather be off camera than popping on and off. I felt like to keep us going, I would see what off camera does. It usually does a little better. If it does log me off, I promise to log back in, and my humblest apologies ahead of time. And so again, thank you for having me, and I do have the questions, and so we'll work through those. I do have a tendency to talk really, really fast, so I have to purposely tell myself to slow down. Not insulted if someone says, please slow down so we can get what you're saying. So I will try to be mindful of that. So let me get to your questions.
Great. And while you're pulling those up, I'll just tell folks in attendance today that I have to meet with our federal delegation at 10:30. So I'm going to pop off, but it's not because I'm disinterested or protesting what's being discussed. So I'll pop back on as soon as I can. But thank you, Dr. Alexander, for stepping in. Go ahead.
So the first question that is on the sheet is, can I provide you all with a high-level overview of Civil Service Commission structure and what we do? And I absolutely can. So Civil Service Commission is responsible for the merit-based personnel system for police and fire. And so we are responsible for ensuring that there's a fair, open, and competitive employment and promotional merit-based system for, again, the hiring of our sworn police, fire, and also EMTs. And so that is, in a nutshell, what the lion's share of what civil service does. We also are responsible for maintaining the disciplinary appeals process for members of the classified service, and that, again, is Denver Fire and Denver Police. What that high level means that if there is a legal issue with a member of either of those teams and they appeal that decision, my office, in orchestration, of course, with the city attorney's office, maintains the disciplinary process for those appeals. Commission staff, I think that's what it asks, an overview of the structure. And so as executive director, there's a question, Julia?
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
I'm wondering 2 things. Do other cities operate like we do in Denver? Is this a pretty common approach to hiring? And then can you, for anyone who might watch this later, describe what classified means?
So for the purposes of Civil Service Commission, what we oversee, have oversight on, is Denver Police. and Denver Fire. Within Denver Fire, we also process for emergency medical technicians. So those do fall under Denver Fire. So for the purposes, again, of Civil Service Commission, those are the departments that I will be referring to. Okay. And Julie, I'm sorry, what was your secondary? Oh, other cities. And so, yes, many metropolitan areas, including Aurora as well, operates within the same kind of guidelines. So Aurora has their very own civil service that operates pretty consistently with how we operate. They have a board that governs, again, their day-to-day processing, not the day-to-day processing, I'm sorry, they govern how civil service processes for these roles. And so I do speak a lot with people who sit on that Aurora, just to make sure that we have some best practices that we can pull from, and just to see if there are some things that we may be able to share with each other so we can work more efficiently, if that makes sense. Sorry. One moment. Probably wasn't a good time for that sip of coffee, sorry. And so I am the executive director in terms of reporting structure.
Nisi, can I ask one more
Oh,
question?
of course.
Follow up, sorry.
No worries.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. You don't, the Civil Service Commission does not have responsibility over the sheriffs?
We do not. Sheriff's
Okay.
is a separate process.
And who has similar oversight responsibility of the sheriffs?
The Department of Safety
Department of
directly.
Safety. Okay,
Mhm.
only from a civil service perspective. Okay,
That is correct.
all right, thank you.
No worries. And so I am the executive director. Civil Service is governed by the Board of Commissioners. We do have 5 commissioners who work with civil service. 2 of those commissioners are appointed by the mayor. 2 of our commissioners are appointed by city council. And there is 1 that is a joint appointment between city council and the mayor. So we currently have all 5, and it's been a challenge to keep all 5 since, post-COVID. But right now we have a fully seated commission, which is super exciting for us because we can get a lot more things done more efficiently. What do we do? Sorry, trying to go back and forth to these questions. Okay, so the commissioner's primary duties is to review and approve applicant files for employment consideration. We also hear the appeals again. Everything that happens between a DPD candidate submitting an application and beginning training. So there are, as you intuitively know, tons of steps that go into the hiring for police and or fire. And I am going to try to pull up the flow chart on my screen so that it's easier for me to just go through them with you all. Are there any questions while I'm pulling those up? That was my stalling tactic.
Yeah,
Guess
keep
not.
going. You got it. You can like put music on while you're pulling that.
No worries. And so speaking of the police process, and so from the time an applicant hits submit on the police side, they go through a series of questions to qualify them. And so that is online. They don't have to come in any longer for that, but it's basically preliminary questions just to make sure that they meet minimum qualifications. And so some of those questions are also covered in what our national testing network does, and some of them come in later phases, but a candidate fills out a behavioral questionnaire at the very beginning of the process, and that's how the process starts. So we screen for those minimum qualifications. There are certain automatic disqualifiers, such as, drug usage and certain criminal backgrounds that we, of course, cannot process for. So we do eliminate some candidates on that front end that will not meet those minimum qualifications. After they are screened for minimum qualifications, then they do schedule testing again with the national Testing Network. That is an outside vendor that we use to process both police and fire. And right now, post-COVID, all of those tests are done online directly with those vendors. And so that has been working out fairly well, where people don't have to come to downtown Denver anymore. We can get a lot more processed in a shorter amount of time. So that is phase one. Phase two is a computerized written test. And so that is where they go through the video-based human relations testing, their reading abilities, their written language abilities, and they have to, of course, have a passing score on that written testing component before they can go on to then what is phase three. And I can send all of this under separate cover later, so you're not jotting down feverishly. I do have it prepared to send over to you after we're done today. So just, as an FYI. Phase three is a behavioral questionnaire. And so this is just an additional screening for minimum qualifications. The behavioral questionnaire I am eliminating in 2023. Just because I felt like we have this behavioral questionnaire. We also have a behavioral history questionnaire. There was some redundancy that I saw in there. And this process really does take a long time for our candidates. And so probably around, on average, 4.5 months for a candidate from the moment that they hit apply until the moment that they get that final job offer. It's a lot of time. There's a lot that goes into it. And so I've really been trying to figure out, and I know this is coming later in your questions, but figure out how can we work more efficiently. And this is one of the things that, again, going forward, the behavioral questionnaire will be eliminated in future academies. Julia, I do see your hand.
Yeah, just curious with that timing, particularly in this market, I run a 1,000-person organization. We lose employees if we're slower than, a couple weeks. So I'm interested in, what attrition do you see from the beginning of the process to the end? And does speed have something to do with that? Or is it, they're applying to 4 different forces and, get a job somewhere else? Like, what does that look like in terms of the candidate pool from start to finish? That's, attriting, not because of, they're failing the test or whatever.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I was going to bring that up later. Let's talk about it now, though. It's a good place to talk about it. And so we do lose candidates in the process. Up until this point, the data has been really just anecdotal, if I'm being honest. So, police and fire will say that we've lost lots of candidates because the process was too slow and they've gone to different departments. And I say that's anecdotal because, as we all know, sometimes when people apply for jobs, they apply to several and they just take the first one that comes along. And so since we don't have a clear starting point where they started that application for Boulder or Aurora, we can't necessarily say, okay, Denver took too long. And so I went to one of those other agencies. People drop out for all manner of reasons. Someone just dropped out because she found out she was pregnant. And so she said the timing wasn't right. Someone else dropped out because a couple of weeks ago, they found out their parent was diagnosed with a terminal illness. They felt like their family responsibility took precedent. People just decide, okay, this really is a lengthy process. I didn't expect for you to ask me this much. I didn't expect to go through this much. People don't turn in the correct documentations when we ask for them. We lose people because they apply for the job and then don't schedule to test, or vice versa. So we get a lot of candidates who will believe that they only have to do one side of it. We're working on that. There's some additional pushes to make contact with candidates to say, hey, you took your NTN testing, that's amazing, but now you have to actually apply for the job. Or conversely, thank you so much for applying for the job. Now you have to go into contact National Testing Network to complete your testing. And so, yes, we lose candidates throughout this process for a multitude of reasons. We do know that we do lose some because of the length of the process. And that is the data that we'll have better gauge on next year, because I've hired a member of staff whose sole job is to make sure that I have good data so I can make data-driven decisions and not just these, anecdotal ones that we make. But what I knew, again, going in, some of these steps have been in place for decades, literally a couple decades, and don't know the last time we really did a deep dive to see if one, we've checked for, equity considerations, right? I don't know that we have. I can't necessarily speak to that, but when I looked at some of the questions that were on the behavioral questionnaire, as well as the behavioral history questionnaire, because I do have some background in, equity initiatives, I knew immediately that there's some things that we probably should not be asking, and some things that really, why are we asking it, right? Does it really get us the caliber candidate that we want? And so, Julie, I know that's probably way more than you asked me, but yes, we do lose some candidates simply based on the extent of the length of the process, but we also lose candidates for various other reasons.
That's helpful. Thank you.
No worries. And so the behavioral questionnaire is phase 3. There are disqualifiers in that behavioral questionnaire as well. And so we will lose candidates from that step as well. We then add in certain preference points, and we're talking about police right now. Fire is just a little bit different in terms of their steps. And so there are points that are added. We then do a language skill assessment. Some candidates will get additional points for proficiency in other languages. And so all of that is contained in that second and third step. Stage 4 is the supplemental application form. That's the big background history form that really says everything. All your former jobs, it lists your references that my background team will contact. All of that goes into that, your age verification, your high school diploma, your college diplomas, all of that. And then after we get all that information compiled, we go to the polygraph examination. And so polygraph is a pass-fail. And so there are times that I will get a report from our polygraphers that someone didn't show up for poly. We give them a couple chances to reschedule that. But again, Julia, to go back to your question, we will lose candidates there as well. I don't want to, make guesses, but a lot of people don't want to enter that polygraph. And so we will lose contestants there sometimes. Then the physical ability testing is phase 6. Again, I know I don't have to keep saying it, but we will lose candidates there as well in the physical ability testing phase of this process. Once you get through that physical ability testing, then there's the written suitability test. Once you get through that the written suitability assessment, then there's the oral interview with a psychologist. So that first psych step is simply online, a questionnaire, right? It still has a pass fail, but it's not the oral interview with a psychologist. In phase 8 is that oral interview. And so in the past, we've had suitable and unsuitable that come from that oral interview. Now we've added an additional qualifier that's a marginally suitable. Right. And so, and also to talk about things that have changed, and I know that's later in your questions, another thing that has changed is in the past, when I first started as a commissioner on the commission, commissioners never saw candidates who were unsuitable. And so if a candidate was deemed based on oral interview with the psychologist as unsuitable, that was kind of it. And so as a commissioner, me and my fellow commissioner said, well, hey, wait a minute, maybe we should be able to see those as well, just to get a good gauge on how we're losing people potentially. And we were able to, again, add the marginally suitable as well, just to make sure that everyone gets a fair and equitable chance. And so what I will say about commissioners now seeing the suitable and unsuitable, we have not seen a ton of change in terms of who ultimately is deemed unsuitable. So since that has been changed probably in the past 15 months, I'm looking at my notes, have been 4 individuals who commissioners said, okay, I recognize that at oral interview with a psychologist, they were deemed unsuitable, but we are going to move them through the process because we feel like this is not really a determining factor in whether they'll be successful as police and or fire. And so I could go on and on about some sentiments there, but I won't, unless of course there's a question. Julia, go right ahead.
I think Stefan had his hand up first.
Oh, okay. You're the only one who I can see, unfortunately.
Oh.
And so thank you for, for letting me know.
Oh, no worries, all good. So I'm sorry, I want to go back. You said you were going to eliminate the behavioral questionnaire, I think in phase 4 or 3, I can't remember. I know there are a lot of phases. But that you thought that because you thought it was redundant of the other behavioral questionnaire that was in an earlier stage. Is that right?
It's actually in a later stage. And so we have the behavioral questionnaire. So we have the BQ, but then we also have the BHQ, which is the behavioral history questionnaire. A lot of the questions are duplicative, which I feel like in the past was done just to make sure that people were being consistently truthful, right? And so if you said, for example, that you didn't have marijuana usage within a year on the behavioral questionnaire, but then on the behavioral history questionnaire, you said you did, that was a way, it was almost like a gotcha, right? And so you said it in this area, but you didn't say it in this area. Again, a lot of the questions are duplications of each other, and it's just an extra added step in the process. And that therefore we will eliminate it and add some more additional questions to the behavioral history questionnaire just to accommodate anything that we might have lost that we found value in the BQ. Stefan, let me know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Since you had said, I was going to ask because you said you did eliminate some candidates, after the second behavioral questionnaire. So you're obviously at the behavioral history questionnaire. So you're obviously picking up some stuff that hadn't been picked up earlier. So maybe that was, in my view, maybe that's good, given that, police officer behavior is pretty important. But if you're saying that you were going to incorporate whatever was in the second behavioral questionnaire into the first, then I get the efficiency and the need to, to kind of more streamline the process.
Exactly. And there's so many other stages, right? And so again, I get that it was probably a gotcha, and I do understand why that is, right? Because we do have some inconsistencies in terms of applicant information that's provided to us. But bear in mind, they go through that behavioral history questionnaire. They also have interviews with a psychologist. My team of background investigators do a really, really in-depth forensic background into their entire history. There's an oral board with the departments, that oral interview. And so there really are a lot of steps to kind of vet through whether or not our applicants are being truthful.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Did anyone else have a question? Because again, I cannot see. Okay.
I do have a question. So
okay.
I have 2 questions, but I'll just ask one. The question I have, can you give kind of a specific example or the context of an example for how you might not pass, one psych exam, but move on anyway? Like, is that you experience depression, but it wouldn't work if you also showed violent tendencies, or, what's the context that you could proceed anyway?
So your example was a good one. There are some that have what the commissioners have viewed as, I don't want to say normal, but that's the word I'll use, normal everyday struggles with sadness. So we had one that recently came up that the psychologist at that time felt like that candidate was only marginally suitable, or actually that candidate was deemed unsuitable because there was a concern with, this person may have depressive episodes and will they really be a good fit for the police department in that particular example. The commissioners did not believe that it was as much of a concern as they did in that assessment initially. And so they did move on to the next phase of the process. Here's what, in full transparency, I don't know that even as a commissioner, we thought through all the way, right? So hindsight being 2020, here's what we didn't necessarily think all the way through. So if I'm a psychologist and I am deeming this candidate unsuitable, there is at the end of the process, yet another psychological examination. And so I would never, as a psychologist, say on the front end that Joe Blow is unsuitable, and then at the end say, okay, I was probably wrong, he is suitable. There's no way that's going to happen. And so I said, okay, well, we're not going to send them to the same psychologist. Like maybe that will solve for it. But then, the 3 o'clock in the morning discussions with myself, it's like, well, that probably would never happen either. Right. And so if I'm a psychologist and I deem him unsuitable, or I'm sorry, if Julia is a psychologist and you deem Joe unsuitable, and then at the end of the process, I get Joe, there's professional relationship with Julia and I most likely, or the likelihood of me saying, yeah, I'm going to refute everything that Julia just said and deem Joe suitable. That's just never going to happen. And so, and I shouldn't speak in totalities, the likelihood that that would happen is pretty slim to none. And so we had all good faith when we came up with the process for commissioners to pass forward individuals who did not have suitable assessments from psychologists. But in all actuality, that probably did not get us what we needed. And so I'll talk about what I think may have gotten us there here in later form. And so
Thanks.
is there
That's very helpful context.
Okay, no problem. And so I know that I only have so much time.
Karen just raised her hand, Director
Thanks.
Murray.
And I'm going to drop off and pop back on in a bit. Thank you.
Okay. My question goes to your ability to assess memberships in groups like a white supremacy group. Is there a portion of your process that focuses on that? And have you made adjustments to it in light of the kind of revelations we've seen with an association between police officers and white supremacy groups or organizations?
And so it's an excellent question. So part of what we are doing and what I asked of when I first took this role is to do a partnership with the Mayor's Office of Social Equity and Innovation. I always get the titling of that office wrong. I think that's it. Social equity and innovation, to really help us vet through some of those questions that we do ask to see if one, we are making sure that we eliminate for bias and improve for equity, but also to your point, Karen, to see if we can make sure that we're asking questions that target individuals that may come from, for lack of a better way to say that, some adverse mindsets. The question is asked in the behavioral history questionnaire, and there's another phase that it's also asked about group alignment. And so again, if I'm being really, really honest, no one's going to ever say that I'm a member of a white supremacist group, just like no one's going to say I'm a member of the street gang. So we do ask the question. Our background investigators do digging. They make tons of calls. They look up social medias and those sorts of things. But that's really the extent of it. And so the question is asked outright about, membership, if you will, to these groups. And we know intuitively that rarely is someone going to share out that they are a member of that group. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we do our due diligence and vetting for these.
Nisi, can I follow up on Karen's question?
Of course.
You just mentioned it, which is obviously somebody's not going to admit that, and and that would be a great concern.
Right.
If you have people like that, and they have been joining the police force. I would think that the investigation of social media is critical in that regard. I mean, that's where, frankly, when I've read news stories about links between individuals who are police officers and their affiliation with white supremacists or other extremist groups, that there's social media history and postings that reveals all that. Your investigators drill down quite a bit to look at somebody's social media history to try to determine that, and then, if appropriate, of course, either disqualify her or at a minimum follow-up questions for the applicant.
And so, yes, if one of the background investigators were to see membership and one of those groups that would come to me immediately, and the request would be to do a stop. And so every so often I will get from a member of my background investigation team a candidate that has a behavior or an issue that's so extreme that they know they're not going to make it through the rest of the process. That membership to a white supremacist group would fall in that category. I have not seen one, Stephanie, again, in full transparency, since I got on. Where our background investigators are challenged is where everyone else is challenged. Is that if I'm a member of any group, right, whether it's a street gang or a white supremacist group or any, my page is likely going to be private by the time I apply for that job. And so that's just the reality of it. And so they do digging. They do their best attempt at due diligence. And that's really all, we can commit to. Again, if an individual is so extreme that they have an account that's public and has that information on it, then we've probably eliminated them in any of these other steps, because they're just so overtly not the correct person for this role that's been picked up on in psych already, or in those behavioral history questions. And so, they do a great amount of digging, but there are some challenges in terms of, again, if my page is private, there's not a lot that you're going to be able to pull from that in terms of social media presence.
Director Murray, Terrence has his hand up too. Sorry, Stephanie.
No, that's right. No, I'm good. I wouldn't even limit. I mean, like even QAnon, anything like that. I mean, I guess, what you're saying is you would also drill down with question, your investigators go out there and interview people and the like, and really try to get to the bottom of stuff, because you're right, most people are going to keep those pages private.
Right.
Anyway, Terrence, go ahead.
Apologize for my tardiness. I had a prior meeting. So with the Facebook pages, social media, et cetera, that are private, do you have the ability to ask candidates to give you access to those pages? So that you could see what their social media posts are like? I know they probably have cleaned it up before. I mean, they'll probably clean things up, but still, do you ask if you can see what's there?
And so we do not. And I have contemplated that. So we have in a previous role to this civil service role, we did ask candidates for that, to have access to their social media. But to your point, most often, they either have a dummy page for public consumption, right? That's already cleaned up and it's only them and puppies and, shaking hands and kissing babies, or, they don't have anything on there that would raise a red flag for us. And so here in this role, which is, for the purpose of this conversation, our background investigators have not been asking for access to those pages.
Although I have found
not the pages that are private.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Understood. I mean, although I have found in my own personal life and professional life, sometimes if you go and look at their friends can give an insight, because some friends just aren't as discreet about what they post. Because I have some friends, I've just had to be like, listen, I can't be friends with you because you say some crazy. So some people just have crazy arse friends. See, that was the PG version. That could give insight into what the candidate could be like.
Yeah, I mean, social media notwithstanding, and again, they do a cursory search of all things, online, but they really do a good job in those discussions that they have, not only with the individuals who candidates have listed as references, but individuals that they have not listed. So for example, if I call Joe Blow's brother and Joe's like, oh, he's a wonderful person and he's done everything by the book his entire life, and then my investigator will ask, okay, well, who are the friends that he hangs out with? This is a potential question, right? And so he's been friends with this individual for years. Most often the investigators will then follow up with that individual. So if, for example, as another example, if you give Terrence Carroll as the boss for Joe, I'll absolutely call Terrence, but I'll also ask Terrence who else he worked with and make those phone calls as well. So a candidate can't just say, okay, I'm going to cherry pick the individuals who I want you to call and not have you call anyone else. They really do, again, a really good forensic investigation where they call not only who's been afforded on that contact list, but do a deeper dive as well. And so what has come from some of our candidates is that we also call any ex-spouse, any ex-mate, which is controversial because I have an ex or two who you might call and not get such a favorable, glowing review of me. And so, we have to take those sometimes with a grain of salt, but they do that as well.
Don't we all? That's why I stay in the house now.
And so I feel like they do, a really good deep dive into our candidates. Will we miss something along the line at some point? Unfortunately, the likelihood is there, but they do, through all of these various steps, a really good, intensive look into our candidates, which in part is why it takes such a long time. And so, Terrence, I'm not sure if you were on when I spoke about it takes around 4.5 months right now from the time an individual hits apply to the time that they get that final job offer. And that is a really, really long time. But part of it is we really try to go deeply into the background and the history of these candidates.
Thank you. And I do get how long it takes. I actually just went through a process with an agency and they recruited me and it took 3 months to get to, a final, offer letter, even after they recruited me.
Gotcha. It's a long time.
And I think Karen has another question.
One other question is kind of a follow-up. And this is in reference to the revelations that have come about as a result of the investigations for the January 6th insurrection. And the question is there a process being developed where there's an ongoing assessment of an officer's membership, mindset, involvement in supremacy groups or extremists?
And just to make sure that I understand the totality of your question, are you asking after hire?
Yes.
And so I would love to be able to answer that, but that's more of a departmental question. And so once they are hired on, they then become the employee of that department. And so that would be more of a question for Chief Pazin or Chief Fulton in terms of how they assess for making sure that the members of those departments aren't members of these other groups or have activities that would be counter to what our expectations are in the city and county of Denver. And so, yeah, again, that's more of a departmental question. I can't necessarily speak to it other than to say I know that they look at it, but I can't give you the overview of how they go about that because that's outside of the scope of Civil Service Commission.
Is it your opinion that there should be some process put in place?
That's always going to be my opinion.
Okay.
Because again, we go through a very extensive process with our candidates. We dig very, very deeply. My joke when I go to meet and greets is that we will know you better than your mother knows you by the end of this process. But the reality is, if I go back to what I said, Karen, about, okay, maybe my page is private. Maybe I've scrubbed, the web clean of anything that would be look adverse upon me. And now I'm on the department and now I feel like I'm free to do whatever it is that I want. Or, life also happens. People change their mindset. So people get out in the community and decide, okay, now my mindset is completely different about this demographic. It just happens all the time. And I shouldn't say it happens all the time, but it does happen, right? And so, yes, I do believe that there should be some sort of monitoring of where an officer's mindset is, where his sentiments are in relation to a certain community or a certain demographic. That's just outside of the scope of what civil service does. But as a community member, I would be hopeful that we're looking deeply into that so that everyone can feel that they've been protected and served and all that comes with that. So I am going to come away from the step-by-step processing just in the interest of time. And again, I will send this out to you, but I do want to make sure that I get through some of the other questions. And another question that was sent to me was, this is the last 2 times that you all have met with Chief Pazin. He placed great emphasis on the difficulty that he is having recruiting new officers. And he apparently spoke to the fact that applications are down dramatically and we can't fill academy classes. And so let me speak to that in short order. Yes, we are having challenges. We're having the same sort of challenges that any other employer is having in terms of recruiting candidates. Not only are we getting a lesser number of candidates, but if I go back to when I first started as commissioner in 2018, to the applicants that I see right now, quite honestly, the caliber of applicants that we are getting at this point is just completely different. And that is just the reality of it. So the numbers are down, the caliber is down, and we are struggling a bit there in terms of making sure that not only we fill the academies, but we get them filled. I don't want to say quickly, but that we streamline our processes and they're very efficient. But if you want to get a gauge on where the numbers are, so in 2018, we had 1,904 applicants for Denver Police Department, and that would encompass entry level and lateral. And so, I'm sure you intuitively know this, but a lateral is anyone who comes from a different department that already has this policing background and then, joins Denver Police. So that's where we said in 2018, it's 1,904. In 2019, we had dropped down to 1,385. And then in 2020, we had only 961. And, we do have some COVID things that we need to add into those numbers. And fire is pretty much the same exact thing in terms of the fact that their numbers have gone down sufficiently. We needed to fill for our emergency medical technicians. By the time we got through the process, we only had 9 candidates and we started with 125. And that is not only disheartening to me as the executive director of the agency, but as a community member, I share Chief Bolton and Chief Pazin's, I don't want to say frustration, but that might be fair in terms of the fact that, again, not only are we not getting the number of applicants, but our applicant pool is just not where it was previously either.
Stefan?
AC, and based on that last statement of yours, I assume that the standards, though, have not been lowered consistent with the applicant, the lower quality of the applicant pool. We're keeping the same, similar, or the high standards that you feel are appropriate, and we're not lowering those standards just because we're getting fewer applicants and applicants with I guess lower quality qualifications.
That is absolutely correct. The standards are still where I expect that they should be. This is part of the challenge for us, if I'm being really, really honest, because the push has been get more people through the process more quickly. Because again, from an anecdotal perspective, the sentiment is the process takes too long and that's why people are leaving. And again, I cannot necessarily say that I believe that's the entire story there. There's a bigger picture than, it took too long and now I'm not interested. But that is, again, part of the frustration and part of the challenging discussions that I have to have with the departments that say, okay, I realize it takes a long time, but trust me, you don't want to just put a warm body and a badge and a gun, right? We have to be very, very mindful that we've gone through a rigorous process, not just to mitigate our legal exposure, because that to me is the least of our concerns. What our biggest concern is to make sure that we have done what we should have done for the citizens, that communities feel like they can trust in our first responders, and that takes time to vet people. And so, yes, the standards are still there. The things that I am looking to change are to be again to make sure that we vet our process for bias, and make sure that we have an equitable process, to make sure that I have worked in partnership with some really, really smart people to look at these questions, and are we asking the right things of the right people at the right times. But no, I'm not inclined to water down the process. That doesn't help any of us. And so same rigorous process, just are we doing it as efficiently? And just to go back just a step, that was the point of that BQ, BHQ. There's a redundancy there. And eliminating that BQ does not water down our process. It makes it more efficient because we accommodated for it in another step of the process.
Thank you for that answer. Thank you.
Of course.
Karen?
Is the military still a significant pipeline to law enforcement in terms of applicants and candidates?
And so I'm going to once again, Karen, unfortunately have to give you some anecdotal data because I'm not looking directly at it. We do get a fair amount of candidates from military service. From what I saw, again, when I first started as a commissioner to what I see now, that number is not as high as it once was, but I cannot quantify that for you for today's conversation. I just can't, and I don't want to venture a guess there, but I know that applicant totals overall have had a decline for a multitude of reasons. Our candidates that come from prior military experience, while we still get a good number, I don't see it in the numbers that I previously did. But again, the totality of applicants is down at this point. And when we talk about the caliber is different, that, Karen, plays a part in how the caliber is different. Not to say that anyone that comes from prior military experience is a shoo-in for these roles, because sometimes they're just not. But it was historically a good pipeline, right? To say, okay, you've come from this experience, you have this sort of demeanor and discipline, and so you would be a good fit for these roles. I just don't see the numbers overall, including those numbers as I would like. Let's see what else we can talk about. Challenges that CSC is facing, that's also on the list. I'm probably going out of order, but we'll just get to all of them at some point. But challenges that this agency has faced. And so I think we've talked enough, I feel, about the candidate numbers. So that is, of course, is a big challenge. But another huge challenge that I am having as executive director of civil services in terms of our vendors. And so everyone is challenged with staffing shortages. Everyone is challenged with turnover. I don't know how the people in the Great Resignation are paying their mortgage, but the Great Resignation is a thing. I don't know where they're going or how they're doing it, but they're doing it. And so how that trickles down to civil services, as you will see, there are so many steps where we depend on external vendors to process through. So our psychological testing, our medical evaluations. And so Denver Health has been the sole agency that has conducted our medical evaluations for police and or fire for the medical portion. I cannot speak to how seamlessly it worked before I took on the executive director role, but what I can tell you is that after I have come on, which of course is post-COVID, we have been challenged with getting appointments for our individuals who are going through the process in a timely manner. What I have tried to do to remedy that is I will go out for RFP at some point. One vendor is just not the most efficient thing that we can do. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for us to just have a sole vendor, especially again, given this post-COVID dynamic where everyone is really struggling with staffing. And so we do have an existing relationship with Concentra. And so in the short term, I will run our police candidates through Concentra and our fire candidates through Denver Health. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on the why there, but in talking with Chief Bolton and his team for Denver Fire, they have a whole different set of criterion for fire candidates. And there was a concern that we wanted to make sure that they were able to get the candidates that they knew would be successful based on that processing for the medical evaluations. And so they fire, as of right now, will go through Denver Health, but we will divide and conquer and send our policing personnel as soon as I figure out this contracting that I am working on as we speak, so that we have more than one vendor there. But in terms of challenges, that has been a huge challenge is our vendors. The same with psych, not to the degree as it is with our medicals, but because we have more than one person on our psych side to run individuals through our psych testing. That being said, we had three agencies that we had historically used for psychological evaluations. I did eliminate one of them this year, so we are down one, but I felt like that was a necessary choice that I needed to make because I needed to ensure fairness and equity for all of our candidates. And so I made the decision to not renew the contract with one of our vendors because I had concerns there. And now we're down to two, so that's a challenge. We had a bit of challenge for a brief moment in the year with my own staffing. So there's been staffing turnover, paramount staffing turnover at civil service. Part of that is just what normally happens when someone else takes the helm, right? It's like, okay, there's a new leader and I feel like I need to go elsewhere. Everyone doesn't follow the vision, and that is okay. And so probably had, the last I looked, an 83% turnover in staff for civil service. But I'm proud to say that we are now, I'm down one person, but we are fully staffed with the exception of that one. And I'm not even going to count that one because I asked for an additional 2 FTE. Which I was granted. And so I'm really up one. That's how I'm going to position it anyway, for the purposes of this meeting, to make myself feel better. And so really, really proud to be fully staffed now, not only just be fully staffed, but proud of the diversity that exists within civil service. Civil service as an agency is the most diverse it's ever been, which helps us as we go through these processes, that we have people with different lenses that are able to look at these candidates and say, well, wait a minute, can we look at this differently? And so those are some of the challenges, some of the solutions that we have vetted for being fully staffed. Added 5 more background investigators to our pool of background investigators. Our background investigators work really, really, really hard, but most of them are retired police officers. And so they do it in their, I don't want to say their spare time, but they do backgrounds. There's never really necessarily been parameters around how many backgrounds they took, how long it took them to do background checks. And I placed parameters around that to solve for that, and added some additional background investigators. So those are some of the challenges that we have faced and some of the solutions that we have implemented to address those challenges. What have I missed? Priorities as executive director. So I spoke about the changes, but my priorities are to make sure that our process is as efficient as it can possibly be. Some of our processes have not, again, been looked at for years and years and years. Not to say that was anyone's bad, but we do have to take a critical look at things have changed. Has our process caught up with how things have changed? And are we being as efficient as we possibly can? So I embarked with various stakeholders in a project improvement process, again, to really take a deep dive into what we do every day to hire for our first responders. It wasn't just my team that was involved in that. Individuals from police, individuals from fire, individuals from the mayor's office of social equity and innovation were there. Our technological support team was there, because some of the challenges that we have is simply with the technology. The technology that I could use to be most efficient is not what I currently have, and I need to take a deeper dive in that. We do a lot of scoring, for example, for testing. The Workday system does not accommodate us in order to hold that scoring for candidates, that's not efficient. I need it to be. That's a priority for me, is to find either a workaround in that current system where we can add for that, or to find a different solution for that. Because right now we're doing way too much manually to be in 2022. That's my sentiment on that. And so those are my priorities. So I don't know how much more time we have. I feel like I've just been talking and talking. And so what have I missed? What can I answer?
I said the only last one is, how can we be of support to the Civil Service Commission?
That was an excellent question. I've been chewing on it, and I wish I had a really good answer, because the only answer that I came up with is maybe we can keep the open line of communication. Because here's where I'll be really, really honest. I didn't even know in totality what you all did. And what I know in reverse is that you didn't know in totality what civil service did, right? And so that probably shouldn't happen. And so we can solve for that by making sure that we stay in communication with one another, whether it's through an official meeting series, or people just want to do a reach out, an email or a call. I mean, I always want to say my door is open. Sometimes it's not, but I really want to be able to work with our stakeholders so that they really understand not just the challenges, right, but also the successes that civil service has, because we have a ton of successes as well. And so I would, again, love to be able to maybe partnership is not the right word, but be able to at least have some collaboration with your office. And so as I go out and try to solve for some of these things, to have yet another grouping to say, okay, let's talk this through, and what have I missed?
And I had just one last kind of question, comment, and I don't know if the board had anything else. I'm just a data nerd and researcher. So now that you have your new data analyst, it might be nice if we can backtrack like the last 2 years with your graphic that you're going to send us to see of those candidates, how many people get excluded at different points in time throughout those 4 phases. I would just be curious.
Yeah, and so that is one of the things that I hired the data analyst for. And so up to this point, we've had data, but I don't know that it's been the data that gave us the biggest bang for our buck. So we had data, we knew how many people applied at the beginning, we knew how many people we ended up with at the end. We didn't really have a good gauge on the how and the why in between those stages. And that is one of the things that Mo is working on. So right now, that data, I don't know that it would give you what you needed, because it's really only been, since I've been on, or actually since Mo's been on, which is probably the last 9 months or so. But that is super important to me, not just to see where people fall out, but also, if I'm being honest, the demographics of where those people fall out, right? So are we losing our women candidates just at physical ability, which has been anecdotally what people have said? I don't know that to be true, because we've never really done the data on it, right? Or are we losing, our African-American candidates in the psych? Because again, that has come up in past, and we didn't have the data to really say that that's what happened. And so we are working on that. And so I can send you, again, what I have data on, I can send you that data. So I have data on what our demographics are for our academies, right? So where we sit from a demographic standpoint on the academies that we filled. I can absolutely let you know where we've started in terms of applicants and where we've ended. But again, I am a girl who, if I'm going to have the data, I want the whole picture, right? And that we're just lacking in some of those middle pieces that I think are the really, really important pieces.
I just have one question. I meant to ask it earlier, but I felt like I was hogging all the question time. You said there's a difference in quality in the candidates that you've had, that you're getting now, and what was before. I know you talked about data, but anecdotally, if there's no data supported, I mean, hopefully there's data. What's the difference between the quality now and the quality then? Can you pinpoint that?
Yeah, and again, I know we don't have to keep using the same terminology, but a lot of it is just because of the applicants that I've seen, and looking at their background and their histories. For example, I do not remember a time where I've seen as many candidates that certify that they've used illicit drugs as I have right now. And so maybe they were hiding it more then, and now they're bringing it to the forefront. But, and I'm talking hard drug usage, right? Which is a disqualifier in most cases, determined based on how long ago it's been. Have seen more of those than I would have liked in recent days. We've seen candidates that have come in and really had some challenges in terms of mental health struggles. And again, I have to be really, really careful there, because we have to be mindful that, people should be able to, how shall I put this? So at one time, if you certified that you had seen a therapist, right, that would be a disqualifier, depending on which one of the commissioners overviewed your file. We're not doing that, but we have people who I have seen that have come through that are on some really, really, really heavy medicated, emotional behavioral type medications. And again, bless their heart, but we have to really, again, be mindful of who we put before us for the citizens of Denver. We've had someone just had an active warrant. I don't know that I have seen that previously. And so just again, there's just lots of things. And then as we comb through them, we used to really be fighting with each other in terms of, oh my God, we have all these great candidates. We only have 52 slots in the academy. We filled an academy not too long ago, and filled being not the right word to use, because I think there were 18 in an October academy and it was slated for 40. So, we can talk further about that separately if you'd like, because I'm lost for finding some really, really good examples. But again, we used to have really, really, really robust candidates who did what they were supposed to do when they were supposed to do it. Now there's a lot of us calling and saying, hey, did you take your NTN test? Hey, did you schedule your appointment with the polygrapher? I try to be balanced there, because, I'm a little bit old school and people have to talk me off of that sometimes. So the old school in me always wants to say, look, if you want this job, you're going to do what it takes to get this job. You're going to go to your appointments. You're going to be there on time. You're going to fill out these forms. And, I will say people have, softened me on that just a little bit. I mean, at my core, that's still who I am. But I've also encountered, members of our department that says, well, how do we support people? I talked to Sergeant Havard a lot about the Black police officer. She's over the Black Police Officers Association. And okay, well, people do need us to help them a little bit with some of these steps. It's an overwhelming process. There are a lot of steps to it. And, I try to honor that. But that is, again, when we talk about the difference in candidates, I don't know that I've seen this many challenges in terms of candidates who simply didn't follow the instructions that they were given. And that's a concern for us. But so what we've done to try to address that challenge is I have allowed for our contact information for these candidates to go out to some of our groups, like, again, the Black Police Officers Association, Denver Fire Recruiters get contacts for our candidates, not the demographics, right, but contacts, their name and their number. And so civil service does not have the staffing, unfortunately, to be able to do massive reach outs to candidates to say, hey, you may have missed a step. We do, but just not as robustly as would probably make the significant changes that need to be made. And so what we have done is we've partnered again with the Black Police Officers Association, some individuals with Denver Fire, the recruiting staff, so that they can also, in addition to the text messaging that civil service sends out and the emails that civil service sends out, make this, voice to voice, more of a voice to voice contact with candidates to try to move them along the process. I saw a hand up, but I can't remember whose it was.
Evan?
Yeah, well, first of all, Nisi, I just want to thank you. I know we're running a little late, but I want to thank you very much for your candor and your detailed answers. I mean, I've learned a lot today, and so really, really, really appreciate it. And we do look forward to continuing to have dialogue with you in the future. It certainly benefits, both of us. I was wondering, I don't want to take a lot of time because, again, we're running over. I know you were going to send over documentation to show the various phases so we could look at that in terms. Could you also, you were just touching on the disqualifiers. I'm just not that familiar. I mean, I was really taken aback by the fact that somebody was disqualified just because they saw a therapist. I mean, I know that's not current, but man, I think in many ways that's a good thing, frankly. So could you send us just a list of disqualifiers in terms of what you're looking for, what would actually disqualify a candidate as of, June 3rd of 2022, if the commission saw that in any of the applicants?
Yeah, I can. And so just top level, some disqualifiers are, I'm a big non-disclosure disqualifiers. It's super hard for me to believe that you were placed in a police car, had handcuffs on, were fingerprinted, had a mugshot, and don't remember that. And so we do have candidates who will not add an arrest. And again, that has nothing to do with the ultimate, what ultimately happened with that case. It just has to do with the fact that you were non-truthful. So truthfulness is one of them. But yes, I will send you, there's a short list. Drug usage. We've changed the marijuana ruling. I'm not sure if you all knew that. It used to be a 3-year rule. It's now 1 year. But there is still that marijuana ruling for 1 year that disqualifies some candidates. But there's a few things on there. And yes, I will add that to what I send over to you all.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys very much for having me. I hope that at least high level answered some of your questions. Do feel free to again reach out, have me again if you want to, rake me over the coals for something. I'm always open to that. But it's really been a pleasure getting to connect with this group. And I hope again we can have a long-standing relationship where we can kind of feed things off of one another. And I apologize again for the camera on and off. I just wanted to not drop off of this call. And so it was helpful to me.
Really appreciate your time today and all the work that you're doing to help ensure we've got great candidates on the force. So I
you.
appreciate that very much. And yeah, if we have follow-up questions, we'll shoot them through Daniel, and just encouraged to, continue the relationship and dialogue together.
Thank you so much. All right, I will log off.
Thank you, Nisi.
Thanks.
Okay, that was super informative. Okay, we have a couple of other items to cover. First, I would like to get a motion to approve the minutes unless someone has any changes on them.
So moved.
Great. Second?
Second.
Thanks. All in favor, aye.
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 Motion passes. Oh, any nays? Okay, great. Motion passes. Moving back to, thanks. Okay. So we were doing a couple of follow-ups from our presentation to City Council on our board annual report. And we happened to notice that we had a typo in our budget number in that report. So wanted to get a vote from the board to approve an amended report. And Daniel has provided the language for that. We basically just have a footnote that says, we said the budget change was X, it's actually Y. It was published as X in the original publication of the report in March, and it's going to be Y in the future report. So didn't want to just do that without talking to the board. It's obviously not particularly substantial. We just had transposed two numbers. So if I can get a motion, an agreement to publish an amended report, that would be great.
So moved.
Great. And a second?
Second.
Great. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great. Okay. Moving to, do we want to talk about the NDA? And Nikki, if you're on, if you could provide some context for that, for what has happened in the past. Might have to wait on that item, but we can bring that up in a future meeting. It sounded like Nikki did have the context of what happened, why, and how.
Yes, Julie, I'm wondering if that's an executive session discussion.
Up to you. You have the context. So if you think that is more appropriate there, that's great.
Well, it is about a legal document, so would that fall within our reasonable executive discussion
Sure,
parameters? Will we be having an executive discussion?
we will. Yeah, we've
Section
got a
next.
couple of other matters to discuss there. So that's fine. We can cover that in the next meeting.
Great.
Okay, working through the rest of the items. Daniel, did I miss anything? Oh, strategic planning. Okay, so Daniel sent around a doodle. We have a couple more members who still need to complete that doodle. It turns out most of us are not available at the same time, which is maybe not a surprise. You know, I don't know if we want to like Rochambeau for the day or you know, whose conflict is more important than everybody else's, but perhaps Daniel, if you could resend that around with availability, people could take another look. We had blocked the time from 8 to 5, but you know, we could probably do it in a half a day if we needed to. And, you know, maybe with some context around that, you know, folks can relook at that calendar. I don't have any other suggestions, but I'm open to other ideas if our teammates have better ways to resolve those.
Julia, and we're committed to all the dates remaining within July.
Yeah, we were trying to complete the discussion, the exercise with Dr. Alexander still around. So that was why we were in a hurry and it was a truncated number of options. But if we can't make that work, we'll just do it later, but that was the goal.
Okay, well, maybe I was able to share this with Daniel, but not the rest of the group. That's when I'm in residency for graduate school that month. So that month is just no go for me.
Okay.
So maybe we can include some August options too.
Okay. Yeah, let's see if maybe a resend, people can look and find, you know, more common days. And then if that doesn't work, we'll look at times when April's no longer.
Right. Well, I'm just letting you know, I won't be able to do July no matter what.
Okay.
And I definitely don't want to do my conflict is more important than anyone else's conflict. But I also feel like, you know, having lost Katina with Al stepping out, you know, I'm now unfortunately carrying the torch of the only person who's been on the board for 6 years. And I don't know if that history will be valuable in that meeting, but it could be. So I'd like to be available.
Okay, great. That sounds like a good approach. Daniel, were you
Julia,
gonna say-
my only thought on that is, for whatever it's worth, is, I mean, in August maybe, and I understand what Nikki's saying, and I do think her input would be valuable.
Agree.
But August might be tough because that's when a lot of people take summer vacations. So, and look, I know everybody's doing their best to try to find a date for people, and that's hard to do. But maybe even, I'm just saying, so we can do it one time. If we're gonna propose if we end up proposing alternative times and dates, maybe propose also September as well as August, because
Great. Yeah, I think if we're outside of July, then we
Yeah.
just like, you know, look at the next 3 months and find a date that works for folks.
Exactly.
That makes sense. I also understand we were contemplating trying to have Al around for it, but if the other thinking is, you know, having as many of the new board members around so that they have had buy-in to the strategic plan, then maybe September is a great choice. Should we be so lucky to have Al's seat actually filled by September?
And then I didn't know if it might make it easier for folks to have, and I hear you on the half-day thing, Julia, that may be a great idea and a great way to get more people involved. And maybe have it on a day where we have a regularly scheduled board meeting, because
Great.
at that point, people would have already set aside at least 2 hours, and then they could just set aside 2 or 3 more. That
Yep.
might, you know, so anyway, just another suggestion.
Yeah, I think that's probably our easiest path for sure.
Yeah.
That's a good suggestion. Okay,
Great. I can sort of redo the poll and sort of split it into mornings and afternoons on the days that we've already sort of
let's do
had
it.
it, and then add August and September. It'll be a much more extensive poll, but hopefully it'll get us a solution.
The point is to find times that we can work together. So if extensive is what we need, then let's do it. Okay. Our contract for the recruiting firm is in process of being signed. So that's great news. It got stuck in
It
vacation.
has signatures, so
All of the
it is-
signatures.
Not all of them, but it
Okay.
has signatures.
We're so close and so far away at the same time. So you know, we'll send a press release as soon as we're ready on that, but we're working our way around the city right now. Okay, a couple of other things. Can you please let Daniel know if you're interested in a police ride along? Just shoot him a note, and he can try and find common times for us to get together, or just times that someone can have us in their car. Wanted to ask if the board has any special requests for information from the OIM in the coming weeks. We have asked for information about the outreach program in a future meeting. And we are also interested in the assessment of the police department's implementation of the George Floyd protest recommendations. And then also the sufficiency of the mutual aid documents. But if you all have additional thoughts or requests for the OIM, if you can send those our way as well, that would be very helpful.
And we haven't made formal requests for those things. We sort of mentioned them, but if we want to make a formal request, we need to do that.
Yep. Great.
I agree with both of those.
Okay. And then we have board elections in our next meeting. So if you're interested, let me know. Terrence is just shaking his head. We do need someone to fill April's spot. So just let me know over email if you are interested. It shouldn't be too heavy a lift, but it's big shoes to fill. So
Didn't you
okay.
hear I worked out a deal where April doesn't have to move?
I mean, we're virtual. She could be on the moon for all I know. But I think the rules are the rules on that. So sorry about that.
Not that we're equating North Carolina with the moon. April.
I think the moon's kind of cold, right? So it's definitely not
Yeah.
metaphor. Okay, so with that, I think we have got some matters to discuss in executive session. So if I can have a motion to move to adjourn from this session and enter into executive session, that would be great.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, see you there.